Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to stop by. I do appreciate it, and I'm grateful. My macro thoughts turn to a headline I saw on Bloomberg, the $11 trillion advantage that shields US from turmoil. Call it America's $11 trillion advantage, consumer spending. And you remember when 9/11 happened and Bush kept on going on about, not stopping our way of life, go out, go shopping. Consumer spending is likely to steer the US economy safely through the shoals of deteriorating global growth and turbulent financial markets. Combination of more jobs, falling gasoline prices, low borrowing costs will help household purchases. Such tailwinds probably matter more than Europe's struggles or the slackening in emerging markets that caused the Dow Jones Industrial Average last week to erase its gains for the year. We've got a lot of things working in favor of the consumer right now. To have that kind of strength is the biggest asset for the US. It's a pretty rock-solid footing, and particularly the very sharp exponential collapse in the price of oil. And if you correlate spending with falls in the oil price, it's pretty dramatic. Household purchases make up almost 70% of the $16.8 trillion US economy, and have climbed an average 2% in the recovery that's now in its sixth year. That's a major source of strength for the US. I came across some very fine dishes. Emma Bankston, who was once Aquavit's pastry chef. I'd never been to Aquavit until May. Then she took command of the entire kitchen. Her dishes include this one called the Arctic Nest. This is on Bloomberg. Link is on Rich Wrap-Ups if it takes a fancy. And then I like this as well. You can find herring on the menu, served with potatoes, trout roe, and red onion. Looked very delicious. I'm still fascinated by this fellow Paul Virilio that I discovered via Pepe Escobar on Asia Times. And a couple more quotes. The first deterrence, nuclear deterrence, is presently being superseded by the second deterrence, a type of deterrence based on what I call the information bomb, associated with the new weaponry of information and communications technologies. Thus, in the very near future, and I stress this important point, it will no longer be war, that is the continuation of politics by other means. It will be what I have dubbed the integral accident, that is the continuation of politics by other means. Interesting point. I still think this is fabulous. The speed of light does not merely transform the world, it becomes the world. Globalization is the speed of light. And I think that's a profound point. And then this is one of everyone's favorites. The invention of the ship was also the invention of the shipwreck. Iran hit back Tuesday at demands from Saudi Arabia that Tehran withdraw its occupying forces from Syria, and insisted no country was more committed to confronting jihadists in the region. They've been at odds for eternity, particularly over Syria, responding to Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Saud al-Faisal's comments that Iran was part of the problem, not the solution in Syria. Tehran rejected the claim. The Islamic Republic of Iran is the most important country in the region committed to the fight against terrorism. Iran has helped the governments of Iraq and Syria fight against terrorism within the framework of international law. We recommend that Saudi Arabia pay attention to the plots of the enemies of the region and play a positive role. Prince Saud said, in this case we can see that Iranian forces in Syria are occupying forces, he said. If Iran wants to be part of the solution in Syria, it has to pull its forces from Syria. The same applies elsewhere, whether in Yemen or Iraq. And as I've said previously in conclusion, we might be on the cusp of a major reordering of US relations in the Middle East and in favor of Iran. Moving on to Turkey, Syria, the Turkish Kurds' anger and resulting unrest is a new source of turmoil in a region consumed by Iraqi and Syrian civil wars. This is another war front that's been opened up by Prime Minister Erdogan, where he's chosen not to bomb ISIS but bomb the Kurds instead. The PKK co-founder Abdullah Öcalan says we will wait until October 15. After that, there will be nothing we can do. and saying things will open the way to provocations that could bring about a massacre. So highly sensitive and fluid situation there as well. Coming to Mozambique, Frelimo remains the favourite, but there are suggestions Mr. Nyusi, who's the Frelimo preferred candidate, may fail to garner the 50% or more votes needed to avoid a runoff. That will be a tremendous upset if that's the case. Somebody else saying it's astonishing, the campaign of Dhlakama, there's a possibility of a second runoff and the possibility that Frelimo won't get a majority in parliament. This is the head of Media Co-op, an independent media house. People were not expecting the opposition to be so powerful. Dhlakama's popularity can be attributed in part to the hero status the charismatic former rebel garnered while holed up in the bush. Manuel Sumbana, telecoms engineer and traditional Frelimo voter, says he is still undecided. I'm very critical of them. It will be very close. They've become too arrogant. Anything could happen. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of a statue of Samora Machel Praca de la Independencia in Maputo. We were visited a few years ago when I saw that this was going to pop over the radar big. And it's a fantastic city. If you ever get the chance to visit Maputo, you must. Gwebeza was ineligible for a re-election after serving the maximum 2 terms. He retained the leadership of Frelimo, so very much still in the cockpit. Nyusi 55 cannot do much because his selection was part of a pact among the big guys within the party. They have chosen someone that they know will do business as usual. I'll put up a photograph taken 138 days ago when I was at the Africa Rising conference in Maputo, and this was the official photo shoot, and I took a photograph of it, and you can see Madame Lagarde and Armando Guebuza in that photograph. I'll also put up that photograph I love, which I took at about 6 in the evening. As I looked out towards the Indian Ocean in Maputo, you can see the palm trees in the ocean, and it's a very pink sunset. And, if you haven't read that article I wrote about how Mozambique could be the next Qatar, please do. Returning to Virilio, War and Technology, he's famously said, we must take hold of the riddle of technology and lay it on the table as the ancient philosophers and scientists put the riddle of nature out in the open, the two being superimposed. In 1995 he said, totalitarianism is latent in technology, which is an interesting point. Saying that within modern societies, the nation-state was the territory that defined politics in the city, with its public spaces and institutions serving as its privileged site. In the contemporary world, however, the city has been displaced by technologies of speed and power. In the military sphere, the city no longer serves as a brake against military conquest and as a site of protection of its citizens. When instantaneous military violence can assault it from hidden places, airplanes, nuclear submarines, and missiles, with politics occurring through media and information circuits, the time of deliberation and consensus is obliterated. Space and time are thus overwhelmed by technologies that travel at ever faster speeds, and when new technologies instantaneously circulate images and information across space. Brilliant, isn't it? Virilio argues that the role of speed has been previously overlooked in the organization of civilizations and politics, and that speed is crucial to the production of wealth and power. His philosophy he called it dromology. It focuses on those instruments that accelerate and intensify speed and that augment the wealth and power of those groups who control them. In his vision, the military comes to control speed and thus to become a dominant societal power. This situation produces an accelerating decline of the state and politics and primacy of the military, which, for Virilio, becomes a key force in politics and society whose importance he believes is usually underestimated. And then talking about how he wished to interconnect speed, technology, and war. The importance of warfare and understanding human history had been grossly underestimated in his opinion. Initially an urbanist and specialist in architecture, Virilio came to view that war was at the center of civilization, that the city, for instance, was formed as a garrison for warfare, that need for defense and preparation for war was at the origins of the foundation of cities. For Virilio, war involved the organization of space through preparing and undertaking the conquering of territory, and thus in terms of logistics, offensive tactics, strategy and defense, there was a unique spatial organization for war. Defense required slowing down the enemies. Talking about the acceleration of events, technological development and speed in the current era designates a double movement of implosion and explosion, so that the new war machine combines a double disappearance, the disappearance of matter in nuclear disintegration and the disappearance of places in vehicular extermination. The increased speed of destruction of military technologies moving toward the speed of light with laser weapons and computer-controlled weapon systems constituting a novelty in warfare in which there are no longer geostrategic strongpoints, since from any given spot we can now reach any other, producing what Virilio calls a strategy of Brownian movement through geostrategic homogenization of the globe. Language is complex, but at the same time it makes sense, doesn't it? Thus, strategic spatial miniaturization is now the order of the day, with microtechnologies transforming production and communication, shrinking the planet, and preparing the way for what Virilio calls pure war, a situation in which military technologies and an accompanying technocratic system can come to control every aspect of life. He said also, we now have the aesthetics of the disappearance of a numerical, unstable image of fleeting nature whose persistence is exclusively retinal. I don't claim to define the situation, I try to reveal tendencies, and I think I've revealed a number of important ones. The question of speed. Speed is the essence of war. Technology is producer of speed war, as logistics, not strategy. War is preparation of means, and no longer as battles, declaration of hostilities. It's fascinating. The division of perception into two realities causes a blurring comparable to intoxication. We are seeing double. It's impossible to imagine what this will ultimately produce several generations down the road. To live in one reality and then from time to time enter another through a night of drinking or hallucinogens is one thing, but to live all the time through telecommunication and the electronic highway is another. I don't think we can even imagine what it may provoke in people's minds and in society to live constantly with this stereo reality. It is absolutely without precedent. Fascinating, and I'm so glad that I discovered it. President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian leader Petro Poroshenko are to hold talks in Italy later this week, the Kremlin said. Global research, I'll just give you one sentence if you're interested in the article, do have a look at it. Though it's too early to tell, I think Ukraine as we know it has gone forever. I'll put up a photograph of Putin and Poroshenko. Getting back to Pepe Escobar, who led me to the discovery of Paul Virilio, he's written a piece, A Caliph in a Wilderness of Mirrors. He's invincible, he beheads, he smuggles, he conquers, he's the ultimate jack of all trades. No tomahawk or hellfire can touch him. He always gets what he wants in Kobani in Anbar province with the House of Saud, which he wants to replace, trying to make Putin, who he wants to behead, suffer because of low oil prices. If this was a remake of Orson Welles' noir classic The Lady from Shanghai, in the mirror sequence the lawyer, American, and the femme fatale, Shiite, would also get killed. But the Caliph of the Islamic State would survive as a larger-than-life Wells, free to roam, plunder, and give my love to the sunrise, as in a brave caliphate world shining in Sirach over the ashes of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. You remember that documentary? That crazy fellow from IS and the Sykes-Picot. God, that was mesmerizing. He's winning big in Iraq's Anbar province. The Caliph's goons are now closing in, of all places, Abu Ghraib, Dubya Deccan Rummy's former torture central. They're a mere 12 kilometers away from Baghdad International, a shoulder-launched surface-to-air missile, or manpad, away from downing a passenger jet. Certainly not an Emirates flight. After all, these are trusted sponsors. Hit in Anbar province is now Caliph territory. The police forces in the province's operational command have lost almost complete control of Ramadi, now controls the crucial axis formed by Hit Ramadi-Fallujah, Highway 1 between Baghdad and the Jordanian border, and Highway 12 between Baghdad and the Syrian border. The Caliph's goons are no less than taking over the whole notorious Baghdad belt, the previous triangle of death. In those hardcore days of American occupation circa 2004, message to Donald Rumsfeld: remember your remnants, they're back and they're in charge. Both Ramadi and Fallujah have been reduced to an accumulation of bombed out schools, hospitals, homes, mosques and bridges. Residential streets virtually deserted. 63% of the 1.6 million people living in the province are classified as in need. How could the Pentagon's spectacular full-spectrum dominance possibly not see any of this happening? Of course they see it, but they don't give a damn. Saying that there are some Apache helicopters, they've got AH-64, but they can be easily hit with manpads. In Kobani, the Caliph wins big. Another biblical exodus has reached 300,000 refugees. Caliph counting on indirect help from the Sultan, aka Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan. Tehran is also rightfully furious as it sees the Western Turkey betraying the Kurds all over again. It's no secret that the Sultan Erdogan is doing nothing because he wants to screw the guerrillas of the Kurdistan Workers' Party and the Syrian Kurdish Democratic Union Party. He bombed them before he bombed IS. He's still to bomb IS. Anybody who believes the US Central Command spin that the House of Saud and the UAE fighter jets conduct bombing raids on the outskirts of Kobani get a one-way ticket to Oz. Imagine these clowns being able to deploy precision-guided bombs or trained laser spotters, saying that the Pentagon has zero local intel. Coalition certainly is able miraculously to hit Syrian state infrastructure, apparently. And then talk about Erdogan. Tehran has having identified Erdogan's nasty game. Big picture remains the same. Sultan Erdogan and the House of Saud want regime change in Damascus. Erdogan dreams of a Sunni puppet as a vassal of Ankara. The Saudis want their own Wahhabi schema. Israel merrily agrees. The Caliph is winning big and bleeding the Pentagon Department. A single US strike against his goons involving F-15s, F-16s or F-22s costs up to $100,000. And Pepe asks, what for? Virtually all the assets being destroyed by American bombing are made in the USA, deployed to the Iraqi army, and then duly captured during the Caliph's offensive. And then saying the Pentagon does not have a clue how to build its Obama-designed proxy rebel force to fight the Caliph. They have no clue who the hell qualifies as a moderate rebel. The rebel must be vetted and then sent to, of all places, Saudi Arabia for training. And then saying the real Dadaist masterpiece is that first these rebels will be politely asked by the Pentagon to forget about getting rid of Assad to fight the Caliph. Saying if all this sounds like a plot straight out of hit series Blacklist, that's because it is. And indeed, it's well worth reading Pepe. He tends to have a very, very sharp ability to look through, cut through the noise and get to the chase. The exits tend to get jammed unexpectedly and rapidly. This is Guy Debelle, head of the BIS's market committee, said investors have become far too complacent, wrongly believing that central banks can protect them, many staking bets that they are bound to blow up at the first sign of stress. This is the point we haven't started from before. There are undoubtedly positions out there which are dependent on close to zero funding costs. When funding costs are no longer close to zero, these positions will blow up. The euro was at 126.40, pulling away from a one-week high of 127.70 on Tuesday. A closely watched ZEW survey showed German analyst and investor morale fell below zero for the first time in nearly 2 years in October. Dollar index on the bounce, 85.93 last, below a 4-year high of 86.746. We're going up there and beyond. In my view, Japanese yen 107.34. Rebounding from the dollar's rebounding from a 1 month low of 106.68, touched overnight. Sterling, big drop, 159. In British, inflation slowed in September to its lowest level in 5 years, prompting markets to push out the likely timing of an interest rate hike. Fell as low as 158.78. Aussie 0.8728, India rupee 61.42. South Korean won 1064.41. The South Koreans cut rates by a quarter point to 2%. Rial 239.91, Egyptian pound 715.12, South African rand 1106.80. The dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I think it's going a lot higher. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I think it's going a lot lower, below 120. Germany cut its growth forecasts, and Fitch has warned that France's credit ratings, they may cut France's credit ratings. Gold was last trading at 1226.49. I'll put up a 6-month chart. I'm not bullish. I think you sell rebounds because of what I see as a very strong dollar coming our way. Crude oil, I'll put up a 6-month chart, $81.37 last, but that was early this morning. I saw it's below 80. An extraordinary, non-linear and exponential price collapse. And I wrote about this over the weekend when I said, who kneecapped oil? I was talking about how much they've fallen. They've fallen about 20% in 3 months, crude oil prices. And I characterized it as unprecedented and white knuckle. And essentially it's oversupplied, and I explained how it's very sensitive to demand-supply dynamics, and you get very magnified moves on that. And I predicted a low of $50 actually, which I said was an outlier call, but could happen. All about extra production out of the US being supplied to the global markets deliberately, I think, as a geopolitical, somebody called it the energy spear. I think President Obama has turned into Norman Bates in that Alfred Hitchcock film Psycho. The US is now the new price setter, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. It will place intolerable pressure on Russia, in particular. Venezuela is another example. You can see how, for this moment in time, someone said to me, what about China? Well, they're going to benefit. At times you get alignment because it's a very complex and fluid world. At this moment, they're aligned with China, but, there is still the pivot in the background. And then I quoted Tim Clark, who was interviewed in Der Spiegel about MH370, when he was asked, what do you think happened? And he said, my own view is that probably control was taken of that airplane. And I was playing on that and saying that my point is President Obama has taken control of the crude oil cockpit. He is in charge of the airplane. He has control of all the instruments. And it's been a wild ride for the last few weeks, and it could get a whole lot wilder. I'll put up a 5-day chart so you can see what I'm talking about this dramatic fall. Brent crude extended its biggest one-day collapse in 4 years. Slumped 2% today. That yesterday plunged 4.3%, biggest one-day drop since September 2011. The market is currently in a state of panic as no one is prepared to put a hand under it, said someone to Bloomberg. Moving on to Africa, WHO says the death toll from Ebola has risen to 4,447 from 8,914 cases. It says cases will rise above 9,000 this week. The number of Ebola cases in 3 West African nations may jump to between 5,000 and 10,000 a week by December the 1st as the deadly viral infection spreads. WHO again. Outbreak is still expanding geographically in Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia. The number of cases in capital cities is increasing. Now I take you back to that article, that warning by CIDRA, who said we believe there is scientific evidence Ebola has the potential to be airborne. That is a nightmare scenario, but it might well be in play already. I didn't mention that in that Laura Kyle interview I did on Inside Story, but I mentioned a lot else when I was sort of predicting this kind of outcome against WHO, who at that time had a very low, flat curve. Researchers have identified more than 300 new viral mutations in the latest strain of Ebola, according to research published in the journal Science. Viruses don't think, they make mutations that are good for them. If it helps the virus spread or to replicate faster, it will be around more. It is a numbers game. The more cases you have, the more likely there are going to be mutations that could change the virus in a significant way. The more it persists, the more likely we're going to be thrown a curve. I suspect it may have become more transmissible, Longini said, citing recent cases among health workers who thought they were taking careful precautions. One dire scientific scenario is that the virus could somehow mutate in a way that allowed it to be transmitted through tiny particles that linger the air. That might well have happened already. That was the point I was making about the speed of mutation, increasing likelihood of the tail risk that Ebola becomes aerosolized. CDC officials are blaming an error in hospital procedures, claiming that it's a breach of protocol, and yet they still have no idea what that breach actually was. Fair point. And as I said, on the 18th of August, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, as is the price of oil right now. The Ebola virus continues to gain velocity. That was August 25. Angola is set to become Africa's biggest oil producer and overtake Nigeria. The South African oil shares at March 27th lows. It's up 3.091% this year. It fell 0.67% yesterday. Dollar rand, 11.0681 area. I'll put up a 6-month chart. This thing, if the dollar really gets going, we're going to go to 12. Egyptian pound, steady as you like, 7.1513. GCC, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia sitting behind the Egyptian pound. Egyptian stock market, however, is at 5-week lows. It's up 30.905% this year. Nigeria oil share, that's down 3.9875% this year. First time below 40,000 since May the 26th. Ghana Stock Exchange is plus 3.962% and at 2-week highs. The DRC is, the government there is saying they expect the economy to grow by 10.4% next year. It's a highball call. Interesting tongue-in-cheek article, 7 ways you know you're an African according to Jacob Zuma. This is in the Mail and Guardian, South Africa. You're not too clever. You'll never need a lawyer. You have crappy roads. You know a little corruption between friends is totally fine. If you see a gay person, you would knock them down. You know that when a woman wears a kanga, it's business time. You wouldn't dream of having a dog, apparently. Relief for exporters as Kenya signs a new trade deal with the European Union. Finally, we have a deal, readying my pen for the initialing of the EAC-EU EPA agreement, said Mr. Kabiccio. Uchumi is selling shares via rights issue. The link is on Rich Wrap-Ups and on the front page. Shares to be sold at 9 shillings a share. I think somebody's going to use this as an entry opportunity to get in, because the current market cap of Uchumi is 2.627 billion shillings. It's very little indeed. KQ is saying they see a 4 billion shilling revenue loss after West Africa flights ban. Their revenue, full year revenue, was about 104 billion shillings, so it's meaningful. But, yeah, and the share price has turned very negative. But the point is, you look at the oil price and just go and compute what that is going to do to the balance sheet and the boost they're going to get out of that. Fuel is 38% of total operating costs. According to a report on CIO Kenya, current stats, Kenya has over 1.5 million people using Twitter. The Nairobi oil share is up 18.5144% year to date. It's 2.115% below a record high set last month. NSE 20 is up 7.57% in 2014. Interestingly, it's beginning to outperform the oil share in the last few sessions. You're seeing better performance in that index. Bob's been interviewed in an Africa report. We don't sell technology, we sell the application, he says. He was asked what is working for Safaricom in terms of data. Inevitably for data, it's social media. Social media is reasonably big in Kenya. YouTube is big. Have a look at that interview I did with him not too long ago. And I'll leave you with the thought, the Kenya bankers are launching a house price index here for Nairobi. House values, property prices were up 3.26% over the last decade in Kenya. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it.